Judge Dredd is a satirical comic that came out in the late 70s. Whereas many fans consider Judge Dredd a hero in some aspects when he's brutally defeating enemies of Mega City 1, the comic stands out as a critique of the socio-political climate of the era. The comic first appeared in the British weekly anthology comic 2000 AD and satirized the policies of then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. Known as the Iron Lady, the comic satirizes her tough stance on unions and use of police brutality to suppress strikes. The story takes place through the lens of America, proving to protect the creators while encouraging readers to reflect on the injustices of Thatcher's Britain. Dredd is in many ways portrayed as Margaret Thatcher's dream cop, an ideal of Thatcherism in being morally absolute and fiercely nationalist, working to stop both evil criminals but also Mega City 1's own citizens as he thwarts the peaceful democratic marches. On the right is a panel of Dredd standing over the American flag, with the Statue of Liberty in the background, hoisting the Book of Justice, highlighting how in this setting, justice is more important than freedom, but also shows the paradox of freedom and stability. As the more freedom you possess, the less stability is present. And on the right is a panel of President-elect reflecting on whether ridding Mega City 1 of the judges is truly the right decision. Initially, she viewed them as nothing more than fascist bastards, willing to do anything to maintain their power. However, her perspective begins to change as she considers the protection they provide. Reading, this isn't just anyone we're talking about. It's Judge Dredd. You saw the vid reports after Necropolis. The Sisters of Death burnt his face off, and he just got right up and came back and saved the city. End quote. Dredd's willingness to sacrifice himself for Mega City 1 and its citizens underscores their commitment to the city's safety. This duality highlights the story's central theme, the ambiguity of justice. The judges are portrayed as heroes when defending the city from external threats, yet their use of violence against their own citizens portrays them as oppressors.
In this part of the presentation, we will discuss the theme of justice and police brutality in Judge Dredd America. This graphic novel highlights the possibilities that can emerge from a system where law enforcement has absolute authority. Some of the possibilities are beneficial to society, while others are detrimental. By the end, we'll have a better understanding of how absolute authority can impact society. On one hand, you could say that the judges provide a form of law and order that's necessary for Mega City 1. This is due to the fact that Mega City 1 contains a massive population where crime is prevalent, and a form of absolute authority might be the only way to prevent further chaos. Their act of maintaining order with absolute authority can bring a sense of security to the general population for multiple reasons. For one, the extreme forms of punishment used by the judges are typically used against criminals, which can in return discourage other criminals from engaging in illegal activity out of the fear of consequences from the judges. Furthermore, the speed at which a judge enacts punishment is quick, which allows them to continue to enforce the law in more areas and keep law-abiding citizens safe. Despite the positive effects that could exist as a result of the judge's authority, there are numerous negative effects that also exist as a result. One of these issues is the fact that the previously mentioned extreme punishments are occasionally used against those who are not deserving. This is mentioned in the America storyline, where America mentions how he could face capital punishment for committing a crime as minor as jaywalking. In addition to this problem, if citizens went to protest against the judge's actions, they too could face extreme consequences for minor actions unrelated to the protest. This is seen throughout the Revolution storyline, where Dredd, along with the other judges, use various methods to prevent people from attending the protest. These include locking people up in solitary confinement, making up laws in order to detain people who are planning to participate in the protest, and the use of violence against peaceful protesters. Additionally, since crime is still prevalent in Mega City 1, it implies that some criminals have simply found another way to commit crimes rather than stopping, which causes more of the undeserving to be punished by the judge's absolute rule. While comparing both perspectives, we see on one hand, the judge's rule is necessary to protect the general population from the crime present in Mega City 1. On the other hand, the prioritization of order over morality makes them a detriment rather than a benefit, as they are frequently seen punishing the undeserving. This poses a question. In a city like Mega City 1, Is an authoritarian legal system necessary to maintain stability? If not, what would be a better alternative?
Ambiguity in Dredd's means of serving justice. Moral ambiguity means a lack of certainty about whether something is right or wrong. This is Merriam-Webster's definition. Justice means the ethical, philosophical idea that people are to be treated impartially, fairly, and reasonably by the law and arbiters of the law. This is Cornell Law's definition. In the film Dredd, there is an attack being made on the expectations of law enforcement to uphold justice with absolute precision 100% of the time. The way this attack is done is through a day in the life of Dredd as he is assigned a rookie judge for assessment. Throughout the film, we observe Dredd and Anderson being thrust into a high-stress situation, forced to make several decisions on how to proceed. There are a few incidents where it is pretty clear that Dredd and Anderson do the just thing, but there are more occasions where it is not so clear. Let's first look at some of the times when justice is clearly present. The first occasion of justice being properly served is when Dredd and Anderson arrive at Peachtree's. They encounter a vagrant outside of Peachtree's, and Anderson's assessment is 3 weeks in the ISO cubes. But since they are at Peachtree's for a triple homicide, they give him a warning and continue inside. This was the reasonable thing to do here. Why waste time with a small crime such as vagrancy when a triple homicide has just occurred? This is clearly the just thing to do in this situation. The next occasion is when Dredd and Anderson breach the distribution center for slow-mo and take Kay alive. Anderson reads the mind of Kay and discovers that he was involved in the triple homicides, but says she is only 99% sure. Dredd says, can't execute a perp on 99%. And he also says that a confession would save him some paperwork. Again, this is an impartial and fair judgment by Dredd, despite the rising stress level of the situation. The last occurrence of justice I will be discussing is when 2 kids attempt to stop Dredd and Anderson. Dredd uses non-lethal stun rounds to subdue the kids, despite their attempt to kill him. This was the reasonable thing to do after giving the kids a chance at the Jube Cubes. This shows character of Dredd because they are in deep with this whole situation and have already killed a few dozen people, so he's under a lot of stress at this point in the story. Now let's look at some of the more interesting examples of moral ambiguity in this film. One example is when Dredd and Anderson are heading for the med center. They kill several perps, and one is gravely injured and no longer a threat. Anderson hesitates to finish him off before Dredd orders his crime was attempted murder of a judge. The sentence is death. Later we discover that this man had a family, which provokes the question, if he had been shown mercy, could he have changed his ways after serving his time in ISO cubes? Here, both the law and Dredd's judgment are in question. Should attempted murder of a judge deserve the death penalty? And should Dredd have ordered Anderson to execute this man after he was no longer a threat? There can certainly be solid arguments made for either side of these questions, going to show the complexity of law and law enforcement. Another interesting example of moral ambiguity is Mama's execution. Dredd decides to wound Mama before throwing her through a window to plummet to her death well under the influence of slow-mo. As the viewer, this is a satisfying death for an evil character like Mama. But was this impartial, fair, and reasonable? Maybe one could argue this was fair death, but impartial and reasonable, I don't think so. At this point, Mama has caused Dredd an extraordinary amount of stress. He has been shot, and Anderson, who Dredd has grown fond of, has also been shot. And now Mama has threatened to take down the building with her. Dredd decides to take the gamble that the transmitter will not work if she dies on the ground floor. An unreasonable thing to do, since she could have been stunned and taken off-site to ensure no explosion. Dredd also decides to dose her with slow-mo before tossing her through the window, so that her death is all the more horrific. This seems to be an emotional decision made by Dredd. He does not act impartially here. Having said that, everything does work out, the explosions do not go off, and Mama does receive her death sentence. This further reinforces the attack and also shows the complexity of law enforcement. The final instance I want to examine is Dredd giving Anderson a pass, despite her technically failing the examination. This seems to once again be a decision influenced by Dredd's feelings. Even though Anderson probably should be a judge, Dredd acts partially in her favor, which by definition is not doing her justice. To circle back on the attack made here, I think a key element to note is that as the stress level of the situation rises, Dredd begins to show less commitment to justice and allows his emotions to be more involved with his decisions. Another example of this could be when Dredd asks Anderson, what are our options here? And she gives two options which essentially boil down to run or hide. Dredd then says, we have a third option. That's attack. This supports the attack being made on the expectations of law enforcement to execute with precise judgment and commitment to justice at all times. Perhaps this is an unrealistic expectation, and that's what the director was trying to point out here.
Going to focus on moral ambiguity of essential Judge Dredd, America. To start, the citizens fear the judges and are constantly being watched. The judges wait for them to step out of line. One of the main examples of moral ambiguity is in relation to the March for Democracy. The judges claim they will uphold the right to peaceful demonstration within the law, but their actions prove otherwise. The chief judge tells Judge Dredd he writes the law and to do whatever he deems necessary to stop the march. In response to this, Judge Dredd uses unethical and morally wrong actions to stop the march, in his eyes, to maintain peace. He misleads the public's perception of the leaders of the march, causing the public to turn against them. He tortures one of the leaders to make him appear weak, and he tells the widower that his sons will be forced to become judges if he does not speak out against his wife, which mocks her death and the cause she died for. The judges also disrupt the march, and the undercover judges in the march start the violence that allows the judges to step in. As we can see, Judge Dredd goes beyond the law to dig up and misuse information on citizens and to distort the situation, making democracy appear violent. This gives the judges a reason to stop the march and appear to uphold the law and to discourage future protests. Despite their original claims, they will not let a protest happen within the law if it goes against their goals. Additionally, there are times where the judges choose to turn a blind eye to the situation, such as when two judges were fighting, and rather than stopping it, the other judges made up excuses for ridiculous things the judges could be doing within the law to cover the chaos. Overall, although Judge Dredd is still focused on enforcing the law, these quotes show that the judges and the system are flawed and they recognize that. However, ultimately, the citizens chose to give up freedom for security and stability and re-elect the judges. In the end, instead of punishing or arresting the leaders of the democracy, he simply tells them that the people chose Judge Rule and the judges did not need to fix the election. There are many examples of moral ambiguity in Judge Dredd. Sometimes he chooses to go beyond the law to enforce the law because he is doing what he thinks is right while claiming he is upholding the law through his actions. Sometimes we see a more fair version of Dredd where he realizes some of the flaws of the system, and despite those flaws, the citizens accept the judge's actions may be a necessary evil at times. This story satirizes how people cannot voice their opinions, even in a peaceful way, for fear of the response of those in charge, and how those in charge feel they are right, even when not acting morally right, or realize they are wrong, but choose not to change things.
Hello, I'm going to be talking about the similarities and differences of moral ambiguity in Judge Dredd, the comic we read in class, and Dredd 2012, the movie we watched on our own. So the main similarity I want to talk about is that both judges use their power over the citizens, knowing that the citizens can't do anything about it. Now, in the comic, at the beginning of the story, they put down a protest with force because they know that the citizens can't do anything to fight back. And Dredd thinks he's doing this in protection of the city, which is where the moral ambiguity comes in, because he is just doing what he thinks is best to protect the city, but he's not really putting himself in the shoes of a citizen who is being oppressed, which is where just the two sides of justice can come in through that moral ambiguity. And in the movie, Dredd tells the homeless guy to be gone when I get back when he enters Peachtree's, but he's just using his force over him and what Dredd thinks is the best thing to do in that situation, which is to get the homeless guy gone. But the homeless guy doesn't really have anywhere to go, so he's just going to go somewhere else and then get kicked out of there too. And so I think that morality also plays in there. And then the main difference I want to talk about between the comic and the movie is that Dredd is more of a solo act in the comic, because in his mind, that's all that matters, is that morality, and he will sacrifice anything in order to get the justice that the city quote-unquote deserves. But in the movie, and this might be more for entertainment, and for a movie, that's really the thing that matters, is that he has a companion, Anderson, who he brings along and kind of shows her the ropes, I guess, if you want to call it that way, and it's not all about the justice, but the movie is also more about the drugs and not the politics. But I think at the same time that could also be because it's a movie and the whole point of the movie is to sell tickets, and I don't know how many tickets a movie would be selling if it was about, Democrats and politics. And so I think the overall argument between comparing the similarities and differences between the movie and the comic is that the movie was made more for entertainment than an actual satire, but it still shows the moral ambiguity and justice that the comic shows, just not as straightforward and in your face as the comic does.
In this episode of Judge Dredd, one of the most important storylines is that of the two characters of Benny and America. Both of those characters have very different views when it comes to the judges and how they rule Mega City 1. We'll start with Benny. Ever since Benny was a very young boy, he has been scared of the judges, using the words lifelong terror of authority to describe the judges. This terror of authority is a representation of the average citizen of Mega City 1 and their thoughts on the judges. This fear is what the judges use to maintain control as easily and for as long as they have in Mega City 1. Despite this fear, Benny is still able to find success with the strict laws. The quote by him in the issue saying, "You can play it by their rules and have a good life." This frame that I took, I think, perfectly encapsulates what Benny's thoughts are on the judges, saying, "So we didn't need ghosts or goblins or vampires. We had the judges, and they were worse. We knew they did exist, and there was a strong possibility that they would come for us." America, on the other hand, is the exact opposite. When she was a young girl, she was never afraid of the judges, and would even comfort Benny when he was scared of them. Just like her name, she represented the long-lost concept of the American dream, that being life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which were all characteristics that no longer existed in Mega City 1. Despite the American dream being a thing of the past, America still wanted to fight for freedom from the rule of the judges, with a quote from her saying, "It's in our hands, we can do it if we just want it enough." And the frame here this is America describing to Benny what she wants from the judges, which is freedom, and that she's willing to do whatever it takes to get that. When you compare the two characters of Benny and America, these two frames, I think, do a very good job. These are both conversations between Benny and America, with Benny trying to caution America about her actions and how they go against the judges, with America enforcing her beliefs that she must do what is right in order to preserve and bring back freedom to citizens that no longer have it. Thank you all so much for listening to this presentation. To conclude, we have come up with 2 discussion questions to be answered and thought of as you move on. The first question being, in a city like Mega City 1, is an authoritarian legal system necessary to maintain stability? And the second being, in what ways do the judges blur the line between heroism and oppression?